Pam Bondi had never expected to be the center of a courtroom drama, especially not for something as simple as wearing a cross. But when she strolled into the Tampa courthouse, the sunlight catching the glint of gold around her neck, the room's atmosphere shifted. Her cross, which she wore not just as a symbol of her faith but as a piece of her identity, was suddenly under scrutiny. Judge Walter Holcomb, a man known for his stern demeanor and sharp legal mind, cast a long look at her. The room fell silent, all eyes on the pair. Bondi adjusted her stance, not out of nervousness but out of a deep sense of confidence that had carried her through years of legal battles. She had dealt with tough cases before, but this was different. This wasn't about law. This was personal. Judge Holcomb, known for his strict interpretation of court decorum, had a reputation for dealing with what he considered distractions in his courtroom. He raised an eyebrow, staring down at the cross before his eyes met Bondi's. "Ms. Bondi," he began in his gravelly voice, "you are well aware of the rules regarding symbols in the courtroom. A display like this is not only inappropriate but a violation of protocol." Bondi stood her ground. "Your Honor, this is simply a cross. I wear it as a symbol of my faith, not as an attempt to sway the court's judgment." The judge, unamused, proceeded to give a rare ruling. He fined Pam Bondi for wearing the cross. The fine wasn't exorbitant, but it carried a sting. This wasn't about the money, it was a message. However, little did anyone know, this fine would set off a chain of events that would reveal the hidden genius of Pam Bondi's legal mind, a brilliance that would eventually turn the tide in the courtroom. But at that moment, the fine seemed like a trivial inconvenience. Pam wasn't about to let something like this stop her. Pam Bondi walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, the sound of the gavel's echo still ringing in her ears. The fine wasn't something she would let slide without a response. Her entire career had been built on a foundation of fierce determination, an unwavering belief in the law, and the ability to turn adversity into opportunity. As she sat in her office later that afternoon, reviewing the details of the fine, an idea began to take shape. She could challenge this. Not just challenge it for the sake of it, but in a way that would force Judge Holcomb to confront a much larger issue, the limits of judicial discretion and the rights of individuals in the courtroom. By the next morning, she had drafted a motion that was as precise as it was bold. She would argue that the fine violated her constitutional rights, citing the First Amendment's protection of religious expression and the right to free speech. The cross was a symbol of her faith, yes, but it was also a personal statement. To fine her for something so deeply ingrained in her identity was, in her view, an overstep by the court. Her legal team was skeptical. They questioned the wisdom of taking on such a high-profile case. "Pam, this could make things worse," one of her associates warned. "Judge Holcomb doesn't take kindly to challenges. You might end up with more fines or worse." But Pam wasn't deterred. She had made a career out of fighting tough battles. She knew that this was more than just a legal issue, it was a test of her principles. The case would force everyone, judges, lawyers, and the public, to reconsider how they viewed symbols of faith and personal expression in professional settings. The media quickly caught wind of her decision to challenge the fine, and what followed was a spectacle. Her critics were vocal, calling her a provocateur, someone who was willing to turn a small issue into a national controversy. Yet, in the face of all this attention, Pam remained composed, unfazed by the noise. The courtroom drama was far from over. And as the days passed, the case began to draw the attention of higher legal minds, including constitutional scholars, who started debating the fine in the media. Suddenly, this wasn't just a case of a symbol, it was a case that would pit one woman's right to religious expression against the very essence of legal decorum. But Pam had one more card to play, a move that would not only challenge the fine but force everyone to acknowledge the brilliance of her legal strategy. As the case gained more public attention, Pam Bondi sharpened her focus. She knew she had to hit hard, make a move that would leave no room for the court or the public to question her approach. She dug deep into constitutional law, sifting through cases that involved the balance of personal rights and judicial authority. She wasn't just going to fight the fine, she was going to make a statement that would force even Judge Holcomb to reconsider his stance. Pam's legal team had its doubts, but she pressed on. She filed a detailed appeal, asking for the case to be reviewed by the state's highest court, arguing that Judge Holcomb's decision went beyond the bounds of reasonable discretion and infringed on her fundamental rights. Her strategy was clear: she wasn't just defending her cross, she was defending the very principles that held up the American legal system. Her appeal focused not just on religious freedom, but on the broader issue of individual expression in public spaces, including the courtroom. Her motion didn't just challenge the fine. It exposed the deeper, more complex issue at play: whether or not the judiciary had the right to control the personal symbols individuals wore in a courtroom, symbols that held personal meaning beyond the space in which they were displayed. Pam Bondi's legal brilliance lay in how she redefined the case. It was no longer about a single fine. It was about setting a legal precedent that would impact every person who walked into a courtroom. The case soon made its way through the courts, and as it did, Pam's calculated approach began to gain traction. Legal scholars, initially critical of her move, began to see the brilliance in her strategy. Her challenge wasn't just an attempt to overturn a fine, it was an effort to protect an individual's right to express their identity and faith, even in a place as regulated as a courtroom. The media was buzzing, and public opinion started to shift. People who initially sided with Judge Holcomb's ruling now began to question whether this was a matter of law or personal rights. Pam became something of a symbol for standing up against bureaucratic overreach. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been told their personal beliefs didn't belong in the public sphere. Then, the moment of reckoning arrived. The state's highest court agreed to hear the case. Pam stood ready, prepared to deliver the legal argument of her career. As she entered the courtroom, she knew this was her chance not just to overturn the fine, but to reshape how the law viewed personal expression. The stakes had never been higher. But just as she prepared to present her case, something unexpected happened, something that would challenge her in ways she had never anticipated. The day had arrived. The court was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Pam Bondi stood in front of the state's highest court, the weight of her argument hanging on every word. She had done her homework, her team had rehearsed their points, and the evidence was airtight. This wasn't just about a cross, it was about protecting the very essence of what it meant to be an individual in a free society. She felt the eyes of the courtroom, the media, and the public all focused on her. She was ready. But as she prepared to begin her opening statement, the unexpected happened. Just as she stepped forward to address the bench, a voice interrupted her. "Ms. Bondi, before you begin, there is something you should know." It was the voice of Judge Holcomb himself, the very judge who had fined her in the first place. He had somehow been granted permission to speak in this hearing, though his presence on the bench had been limited to the initial trial. The silence in the room was palpable as everyone turned to see the man who had sparked this entire legal battle. Pam was taken aback. She had expected to confront the legal system, not the man who had been at the center of it. But she didn't flinch. If anything, the interruption only strengthened her resolve. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of curiosity. "What could you possibly have to say at this stage?" Holcomb stood, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. "I came here today not as a judge, but as someone who has reconsidered his actions. I've spent the last several weeks reviewing the legal precedent and the arguments surrounding this case. And, I have to admit, I made a mistake." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Pam's mind raced. What was going on here? Was this some kind of tactic to throw her off balance? "I believe," Holcomb continued, "that I acted prematurely when I fined you for wearing that cross. The finer points of your argument, and the constitutional implications of your case, have made me realize that the line between personal expression and courtroom decorum is not as clear-cut as I once thought." Pam was momentarily speechless. This wasn't the Judge Holcomb she had known, the unyielding, strict enforcer of courtroom rules. His sudden change of heart was unexpected, and it left the room in a state of stunned silence. But she didn't let her guard down. Judge Holcomb continued, "In light of this, I am offering a full retraction of the fine and will submit a statement to the court acknowledging that it was issued without the proper legal consideration." Pam could feel the momentum shifting. This wasn't just an apology, it was a full admission of his error. Yet, she knew the game wasn't over. There was still one final piece of this puzzle left to solve. With her legal brilliance, Pam had already anticipated that the judge might backpedal. But she wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. The courtroom was now her stage, and she had to finish what she had started. The courtroom was in an eerie hush. Judge Holcomb's unexpected admission sent shockwaves through the room. Pam Bondi stood motionless for a brief moment, taking in what had just transpired. But as much as she appreciated the judge's retraction, she knew the matter was far from over. This wasn't about just getting the fine lifted, it was about the broader principles at stake and ensuring that the legal system didn't allow this kind of overreach to become the norm. Pam raised her hand, signaling to the court that she had something to say. The murmurs quieted down as all eyes turned to her. "Judge Holcomb," she began, her voice cutting through the tension, "while I appreciate your acknowledgement of the error, this case is no longer just about me or the fine. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. It's about the precedent we set when a person's right to express their faith is questioned in a place that should represent justice and fairness." She turned her gaze toward the bench, her eyes meeting the judges who had been tasked with reviewing the case. "The issue here is not just whether I should have been fined. The issue is whether the court can or should ever impose such a penalty for something as personal as religious expression. We are not talking about a disruption to the proceedings, we are talking about a simple symbol that holds deep meaning to me and to countless others." Pam paused, allowing her words to sink in. She had spent years honing her skills as a lawyer, but it was moments like these that tested everything she had learned. This was not just about law. This was about standing firm for the very principles that had built the legal system she revered. The judges sat in silence, their faces unreadable. Pam knew they were considering the weight of her words. She wasn't just asking them to rule in her favor, she was asking them to stand up for everyone who might one day find themselves in a similar situation. She continued, "By ruling in my favor, you would not only be righting a personal wrong, but you would be sending a message to every American that the government cannot, and will not, dictate what symbols we can wear or express, especially in a setting that should be about fairness and justice." The room remained silent. Pam had made her case, and now, it was in the hands of the court. Judge Holcomb, still standing, seemed to be considering her words carefully. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Ms. Bondi, I have no doubt that your arguments are well-founded. However, as a judge, I am obligated to ensure that the legal system does not allow for such personal expression to undermine the authority of the court." Pam didn't let the tension rattle her. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness. And in the end, isn't that what this court is supposed to represent?" The judge nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right. Let us deliberate." As the judges withdrew to consider the case, Pam felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had done more than just challenge a fine, she had elevated the conversation. She had made a stand for personal rights, and no matter the outcome, she had already won something far more valuable. When the judges returned, the decision was clear. They ruled in Pam's favor, not just voiding the fine, but also setting a new precedent for personal expression in the courtroom. The ruling was a victory not only for Pam, but for everyone who valued their right to express themselves freely. Pam Bondi's brilliance had been undeniable. She had turned a small issue into a landmark case, redefining the boundaries of individual rights and personal expression in a legal context. In doing so, she had proven that sometimes, the most powerful arguments are the ones that challenge the status quo. As the courtroom emptied, Pam walked out with her head held high. She hadn't just won the case. She had reshaped the conversation about freedom, faith, and the law. And in that moment, Pam Bondi knew that this victory would be remembered long after the headlines faded away. Pam Bondi's victory in the courtroom was more than just a personal triumph, it became a watershed moment in the broader political and legal landscape. News outlets covered the ruling with an intensity that only high-profile cases could command, but what made this case truly remarkable was the conversation it sparked across the nation. Within hours of the decision, social media erupted. Supporters hailed Pam as a champion of free expression, with many drawing parallels between her case and other historical battles for personal and religious rights. On the other hand, critics accused her of turning a trivial matter into a national debate, claiming that her actions had undermined the integrity of the court. Pam didn't care about the critics. What mattered was that she had shifted the conversation about how courts handled personal expression. More than that, her case sent a message to anyone who ever felt silenced or marginalized: if you stand firm, if you use the law as your weapon, you can reshape the boundaries of what is acceptable in society. Even within legal circles, the case became a point of debate. Law journals published in-depth analyses of the ruling, questioning how far the court's decision would go in terms of future cases involving personal expression. The question of whether symbols like crosses, religious tattoos, or other personal markers could be legally regulated in government spaces became an area of significant scrutiny. Pam was approached by political strategists, advocacy groups, and even religious organizations, all of whom saw her as the symbol of a new movement to defend personal freedom in public spaces. She was asked to speak at conferences, write op-eds, and even join advisory boards to help shape public policy regarding religious expression. It was an overwhelming wave of attention, and yet, through it all, Pam remained focused on one thing: the law. But her work wasn't done yet. While her victory had been significant, Pam knew that this was just the first chapter in a much bigger fight. The ruling had set a precedent, but it was only a matter of time before someone would test its limits. She couldn't let the public forget what had happened. She had to ensure that this victory didn't fade into history as just another legal case. It had to be the spark for a movement that would protect the right to personal expression for generations to come. A few months later, Pam was asked to testify before a congressional committee. The topic: religious expression in public spaces and government institutions. It was clear the debate had only just begun. And once again, Pam found herself on the front lines. Her testimony was nothing short of powerful. She spoke with clarity, passion, and conviction, drawing from her own experiences to underscore the importance of protecting personal beliefs in the public sphere. "This isn't just about a cross or a fine," she said. "It's about a person's right to exist as they are, to express who they are without fear of judgment or repercussion. In the courtroom, in the public square, in our lives, we must preserve the freedom to live out our values, no matter how they manifest." The committee members were attentive, some nodding in agreement, while others looked pensive. Pam knew this was just the beginning of something much larger. The room was filled with legislators who could turn her case into legislative action, crafting bills to further protect individual expression. The ripple effect of her court victory had the potential to reshape entire policies, pushing the boundaries of what was allowed in the public sector. As the committee hearings concluded, Pam stepped out into the hallway, her mind racing with the implications of what lay ahead. She had become a voice for change, and although the path was uncertain, she knew she was on the right side of history. For Pam Bondi, this wasn't just about one case, one fine, or even one victory. It was about something deeper. It was about ensuring that, in America, personal freedom would always be protected, no matter the symbol, no matter the belief, and no matter who was watching. And as the sunlight poured through the windows of the Capitol, Pam smiled. The battle for personal rights had only just begun, and she was ready to fight it every step of the way. The victory that Pam Bondi had won in the courtroom, and the subsequent ripple it caused, set a fire within her. The political and legal world had been turned on its head, and she was now a prominent figure in a movement that fought for the protection of personal expression. What started with a simple cross had transformed into a nationwide discussion about freedom, religious rights, and the very core of American identity. But as the buzz around her case began to settle, Pam realized that her work was far from over. She found herself deep into a new phase of her career, navigating the complexities of political influence, media attention, and legal reform. Meetings with senators and congressmen became routine. She had developed a reputation as someone who could take a controversial issue and transform it into a concrete legislative proposal, and that was exactly what she aimed to do. Pam's next step was to push for a nationwide legislative initiative that would protect personal symbols of faith and expression in public spaces. But the political landscape was not as friendly as she had hoped. While some politicians rallied behind her cause, others viewed it as a distraction from more pressing matters. The lines were drawn. For some, Pam was a hero defending religious freedom; for others, she was a political provocateur playing on emotional hot-button issues. One day, she sat across from a group of influential lawmakers, people she had come to know as allies in her quest for legal reform. They were cautiously optimistic about the changes she was proposing, but they warned her, pushing for federal protections would face fierce opposition from those who feared the entanglement of government and religion. Pam listened intently, but the doubt in their voices only strengthened her resolve. She had fought too hard to back down now. "This isn't about making religious expression mandatory," she said. "This is about ensuring that personal beliefs are respected. It's about creating space for every American to walk into a government building or a courtroom without feeling that their identity is being attacked." But the battle would prove to be more complicated than she had anticipated. While Pam worked tirelessly to gain support from lawmakers, the media, once her ally, began to shift. Outlets that had praised her legal victory now began to question her motivations. Was she using her case as a platform for personal gain? Was this more about making headlines than making a real difference? Pam didn't care about the headlines. She had a cause, and it was bigger than her personal reputation. Yet, the constant scrutiny wore on her. At night, she'd lie awake, reflecting on how everything had changed, from the courtroom to the media frenzy, from a single cross to a full-scale battle for rights. She knew that this fight was not just about legal reform, it was about redefining what it meant to be free in America. And then, a new development shook her to her core. A powerful coalition of advocacy groups, with deep political ties, announced their opposition to her efforts. They argued that by defending personal symbols of faith in public spaces, Pam was opening the door to a slippery slope where religion could infiltrate every aspect of public life. Their campaign gained traction quickly, filling the media with narratives that painted her as someone who was pushing the country toward religious extremism. Pam was undeterred. She wasn't about to let her message be twisted into something it was not. She was not promoting any specific religion, she was promoting the right of individuals to express themselves, to wear what they believed in without fear of judgment or restriction. She pushed forward, not just for religious freedom, but for personal freedom across the board. She broadened her campaign to include symbols of all kinds, arguing that personal expression, whether religious, political, or cultural, was the bedrock of a free society. At the same time, she worked behind the scenes, strategizing with her legal team to draft a federal bill that would protect personal symbols of expression across all government institutions. The bill would provide a legal framework that allowed for individual expression without disrupting the operation of the state. It would preserve the sanctity of personal beliefs while ensuring that government spaces remain neutral. The fight had evolved. It was no longer just about a cross, it was about the right to be yourself, no matter where you were. And Pam Bondi wasn't about to let that fight go down without a full-scale battle. As she stood on the steps of the Capitol building one chilly morning, preparing for a rally to gain public support, Pam knew the fight ahead would be her toughest yet. But it was one she was ready for. The outcome was uncertain, but she had one unwavering conviction: the fight for personal expression was a fight worth winning. The fight had reached its peak. Pam Bondi stood at the podium on the steps of the Capitol, a crowd of supporters gathered before her, each holding signs that read, "Freedom to express, protect personal symbols, and we are who we are." The energy in the air was palpable. This was no longer just a legal issue, it was a movement. Pam adjusted the microphone and looked out over the crowd. She could see the faces of individuals who had joined the cause for all kinds of reasons: some were religious, others simply believed in the freedom of expression in its purest form. But they were all united under a banner of shared ideals, the right to live without fear of having their personal beliefs or symbols judged or erased. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before addressing the crowd. Thank you all for being here today. This isn't just my fight, it's our fight. It's a fight to protect the very core of what it means to be free in this country. The roar of the crowd affirmed her words, their energy filling the air, and Pam felt a surge of determination. She had spent years working for the people in the courtroom, but this was different. This was about more than winning cases or drafting legal documents, it was about standing for something bigger than herself. Pam continued, her voice unwavering. This isn't a matter of religion, it's a matter of rights. Whether it's a cross, a symbol of your culture, or a tattoo that tells the story of who you are, your right to express yourself in this country is something worth protecting. We don't ask for permission to exist. We don't ask for permission to be who we are. The crowd erupted in applause. Pam felt the weight of the moment. She knew the odds were long. But the legal groundwork had been laid. The battle lines had been drawn. Days after her rally, Pam's bill was brought before Congress for the final vote. It had gone through months of deliberation, back-and-forth negotiations, and heated debates. But Pam had navigated it all with skill, gaining the support of key allies and neutralizing the attacks from opponents. She had become an unstoppable force, not just in the courtroom, but in the halls of government. The day of the vote arrived, and Pam found herself standing in the chamber, watching the process unfold. The air was thick with anticipation as the votes were tallied. She could hear her heart beating in her chest. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for. And then, the result came in. The bill had passed. Pam stood there, surrounded by her team, the gravity of the moment sinking in. The crowd in the chamber erupted in cheers, but Pam didn't celebrate. She was a lawyer, not a politician, and this victory wasn't about her. It was about the people who believed in what she had fought for, the right to be seen, to be heard, to express oneself freely without fear of retribution. Her victory wasn't just a legal one, it was a cultural one. The ruling had set a national precedent, protecting personal symbols of expression in public spaces across the country. People could now wear, display, and express who they were, without fear of punishment from the government or from any institution that sought to control their personal identity. As Pam left the chamber, the media was there to greet her. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in her direction, but she took a moment to breathe. The fight had been long, and it had cost her more than just time, it had cost her personal peace, had put her under the scrutiny of the public eye. But it had been worth it. The final words of the debate echoed in her mind as she walked out into the sunlight, this bill is more than just a law. It's a statement. A statement about who we are as a nation. A nation that is built on the freedom to live as we choose, to believe as we choose, and to express that belief with pride. And with that, Pam Bondi knew her legacy had been secured. She had reshaped a conversation, sparked a movement, and created a new standard for freedom of expression in America. For her, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the fight for personal rights would continue, where people would never again have to hide who they were for fear of judgment. The victory was not just for her. It was for every person who would walk into a courtroom, a government building, or any public space and feel free to express who they truly were, without hesitation, without fear, and without apology.